On this Monday night, the accelerating COVID-19 pandemic. The World Health Organization's new dire warning.
The greatest threat we face now is not the virus itself.
And why the worst-hit country wants to slow down testing. Canada versus China and the charges against the two Michaels.
We deplore it.
Why Prime Minister Trudeau is refusing to do a prisoner swap. Another Canadian shot dead by police. His family's desperate fight for answers. And feeling zen in a den.
I really enjoyed actually sweating.
The Dome's letting hot yoga enthusiasts feel right at home.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. There's been a setback in the fight against COVID-19 in many parts of the world. Canada and other countries may be moving ahead with reopening plans, but the global picture shows the pandemic is worse than ever. Yesterday, the World Health Organization reported more than 183,000 new cases around the world. That's the highest number of cases recorded in a single day. So many of those cases are coming from two regions. Brazil seeing the biggest surge, reporting more than 34,000 new cases today. The total there, now over 1 million. And the U.S. with more than 32,000 new cases. It's still the worst hit country overall with more than 2 million cases. As Redmond Shannon reports tonight, the news comes as some countries show worrying signs of a second wave.
There was no masking emotions at Madrid airport as Spain finally ended its state of emergency. The tourism destination has reopened its borders to most European Union countries after 3 months that saw almost 30,000 coronavirus deaths. Progress in France on Monday too, with kids returning to school.
But as many countries begin to open up, the worldwide picture remains grim, with a new record of daily new cases. And many of the countries that had been doing well are now showing signs of a second wave.
The pandemic is still accelerating. It took more than 3 months for the first 1 million cases to be reported. The last 1 million cases were reported in just 8 days.
Almost half of the new cases on Sunday came from Brazil and the US alone, with heavy death rates across Latin America. This coffin maker in Peru is barely able to keep up with the demand. Violence broke out in Germany when 700 people in an apartment block were quarantined. The country had been doing a better job than many European nations, but the reproductive number of the virus there is now thought to be above 2 or even close to 3. The R number needs to stay below 1 to keep the spread in check. More than 1,000 workers also tested positive at this German meat processing plant.
Explodierende Zahlen.
The state premier says he won't rule out new lockdown measures. South Korea has been one of the success stories of pandemic management. But officials say a small but significant second wave has arrived much earlier than expected.
South Korea, with other countries, demonstrate that even when you get down to very low incidence, you still have to have a very strong public health surveillance system.
South Korea has managed to avoid full lockdowns by implementing a huge trace and test program and relying on public adherence to physical distancing measures. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
In the U.S., where the first wave is still accelerating, some states are reporting more cases among younger people who've been congregating at bars and concerts. And there is more criticism of the president tonight, who joked that the U.S. should slow testing to bring the numbers down. Jennifer Johnson reports.
From coast to coast, new cases of COVID-19 are breaking records. Dramatic spikes in over 24 states. Florida hitting over 100,000 cases, close to 3,200 deaths. The highest infection rates among young adults crowding bars and beaches.
Our cases are shifting in a radical direction younger.
A record for new cases was set Saturday in California. ICU beds becoming scarce in Arizona. In Texas, some counties are making masks mandatory after Austin and San Antonio became 2 of the 5 hotspots in the country. Doctors angry after U.S. President Donald Trump suggested the numbers would go down if testing was stopped.
Potential 200,000 deaths by October. It is the number. It has overtaken everything, including homicide and suicide as the #1 cause of death in the last 3 months. So this is no joking matter.
White House officials say the president was joking, but admit they are preparing for another deadly wave.
We are filling the stockpile in anticipation of a possible problem in the fall.
New York, once the country's epicenter, has better news, entering phase 2 of its economic reopening.
Hundreds of thousands of people will be going back to work.
Experts say people need to keep practicing prevention, frequent hand washing, physically distancing, and avoiding large crowds. But the country's lockdown has taken its toll.
Longer that you sit with that stress, I mean, that is when we start seeing people come in with, debilitating panic attacks.
Researchers suggest getting outside, but keep your distance. The new normal for a country desperate to go back to the way things used to be. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Here at home, there's some good news to tell you about on the COVID-19 front. Overall, there were just 284 new cases reported in the past 24 hours. The majority of cases are in Ontario, which reported 161 positive test results today. In that province, there have been fewer than 200 new cases in 8 of the 9 past days. And in Quebec, there were 69 new cases, but no new deaths for the first time since March 1st. A third migrant worker has died from COVID-19 in Ontario. Concerns over the health and safety of these seasonal laborers prompted Mexico to bar its citizens from coming to work on Canadian farms. But Ottawa finally struck a deal with the Mexican government to improve conditions and allow migrant workers to keep coming here. Our Abigail Beeman spoke with Mexico's ambassador to Canada, who is optimistic about the changes.
Bunks separated by cardboard in this video posted by Justice for Migrant Workers. The farm they named didn't respond to a request for comment.
The risk is increased because they are not proper. People staying in overcrowded conditions.
Mexico's ambassador to Canada tells Global News a big part of the new agreement reached between the two countries sees Canada stepping up inspections and doing them in person. The Canadian government confirms in-person inspections will start this week. They were put on hold in April. Last week, Mexico hit pause on the migrant worker program, leaving as many as 5,000 approved workers waiting. Now, Juan Jose Gomez Camacho says they're allowed in due to the agreement that also sets up a group that can respond immediately to problems.
So we are really very pleased. We think we're moving in the right direction.
The deal also calls for sanctions for employers who don't follow the rules.
And we are ensuring that changes are made and that there will be consequences.
Frankly, it's very clear that the government is not able in responding to what is a life and death situation.
The 3 Mexican workers died in southwestern Ontario, where the outbreak is most acute. Monday, Premier Doug Ford announced Windsor-Essex is the only part of the province that won't proceed towards the next phase of reopening, largely blaming farmers who won't send workers for tests.
Like, I'm begging here for your support for the people of Windsor and Essex. What more do you want me to do? It's frustrating, to say the least. Sorry for going on, but man, everyone else is cooperating in the whole province.
The Premier also promised new inspections of migrants' work and living conditions done in cooperation with Ottawa. And while Ford says he can't force anyone to get tested, he did hint at taking stronger measures if people don't cooperate, worried if the outbreak gets worse in one part of the province, it will spread. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
The federal government is back at it with China over the case of the 2 Michaels. The Prime Minister says it's clear Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor were detained in an obvious attempt to put political pressure on Ottawa over the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. China strongly disagrees and has issued Canada a warning. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken is following the increasingly bitter feud. David?
Well, Robin, when China charged the 2 Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig, last week with spying, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau criticized China for what he called their arbitrary detention, and he called the charges disappointing. Those comments seem to have hit a nerve in Beijing. The recent erroneous remarks made by the Canadian side clearly show that Canada is applying double standards on the so-called judicial independence. China's foreign ministry spokesman said Monday. There is no such thing as arbitrary detention. And spokesperson Zhao Lijian also said Meng's case and the case of the two Michaels were unrelated. Meng Wanzhou's case is totally different from the case of Canadian citizens. Anyone without prejudice would know that clearly. Trudeau, speaking hours later, said it is obvious the two cases are linked.
It has been obvious from the beginning that this was a political decision made by the Chinese government, and we deplore it.
And Trudeau was emphatic when he was asked if his government is considering a trade of Meng for the two Michaels.
No, we're not considering that. Canada has a strong and independent justice system. We will ensure that it goes through its proper forces, and anyone who's considering weakening our values or weakening the independence of our justice system doesn't understand the importance of standing strong on our principles and our values.
Canada also got support Monday from key allies who are speaking up against China's actions. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said last week's charges of spying were, quote, politically motivated and completely groundless. And he, too, is calling for the immediate release of the two Michaels. Robin?
David Aiken in Ottawa. Iran says it will send the black boxes from that Ukraine passenger plane it shot down in January to France. The strike killed all 176 people on board, including 57 Canadians. Iran initially denied shooting down Flight 752, but later acknowledged it made a disastrous mistake. A Toronto police officer is facing a series of charges in connection with an alleged fraud scheme linked to the tow truck industry. Constable Ronald Joseph was first arrested a week ago, charged with breach of trust and theft. He was taken into custody again on Thursday on other offenses, including organized crime. He's accused of being part of an operation that saw tow truck drivers get their hands on encrypted police radios to get information on collisions. The Toronto Police Service says Joseph took kickbacks for providing insider knowledge.
He used his position to steal and transfer a police radio that would give advantage to the group with respect to the ability to intercept police communications, attend more accidents, or perhaps evade police detection.
Toronto police have laid at least 50 charges against a total of 11 people as a result of the investigation. Joseph is suspended with pay. The family of an Ontario man who was shot dead by police is demanding the officer involved be immediately fired and a public inquiry launched. 62-year-old Ejaz Chowdhury was suffering from schizophrenia and may have stopped taking his medication. His death has sparked days of angry protests outside the building where he lived. And that's where we find Global Toronto's Sean O'Shea tonight. Sean.
Robin, this protest involves the shooting death of a 62-year-old man with mental illness. It is the second shooting of its kind since April involving the same police department.
Anger and frustration stemming from the latest death of a mentally ill man in Mississauga, 62-year-old Ejaz Chowdhury.
He was schizophrenic and he did have a history of mental illness, but I don't think that was he needed to be killed for that.
He's like the neighborhood uncle. He would ask everyone how you're doing. You know, he's a really nice and sweet man, and it's so sad to see his life being taken away.
Peel police responded to a call for help late Saturday afternoon, a report of a man in crisis who was not taking his medication. Arriving at Chowdhury's residence, officers fired a taser, then plastic projectiles, then used deadly force. Police say Chowdhury had a knife, but he was alone in the apartment when police burst in.
Going in heavily armed and so on and so forth, not the way to go.
Criminology professor Rob Gordon says the police approach here appears to make no sense.
What are they thinking?
Earlier this month, the same police force shot and killed 26-year-old DeAndre Campbell. He also had schizophrenia. Family members remembered him at an anti-racism protest this month.
Because at this point, we don't feel like human beings. It's like shoot first and ask questions later.
Peel's chief of police recently told Global News there needs to be a better job dealing with mental health calls.
It's the opposite outcome than what we ever took our oath to do. Should there be bolstering of other systems so that I don't have to be, or my officers don't have to be at the doorstep of people in a mental health crisis? 100%.
The community is demanding answers, insisting police be forced to explain why they shot a man dead who was apparently only a threat to himself.
That was a cold-blood murder.
That's a first-degree murder.
Yeah. That's a cold-blood murder.
We want justice. We want whoever did what they did to be held accountable.
It's happening again and again and again, and the police are not being held accountable for their actions.
That justice will have to wait, as the province's Special Investigations Unit has now invoked their mandate, meaning this community may not have answers for some time.
This case is now in the hands of Ontario's Special Investigations Unit, which looks into all police-related deaths. But the community and the families say they're not satisfied with anything less than a public inquiry and the officer being fired. Robin.
Sean O'Shea in Mississauga, Ontario. A noose, one of the most threatening images of America's long history of racist violence, was left in the garage of NASCAR's only black driver, sparking an FBI investigation. But today there was a powerful moment trackside as fellow drivers stood by Bubba Wallace, pushing him to the front of the pack. Wallace has been extremely vocal in the wake of George Floyd's death, demanding justice. He's also the driving force that pushed NASCAR to ban the Confederate flag from its facilities and events, which went into effect this month. In a statement, Wallace says the despicable act of racism and hatred leaves me incredibly saddened and serves as a painful reminder of how much further we have to go as a society and how persistent we must be in the fight against racism. An explosive situation in Nova Scotia.
Oh my God, the whole world.
Coming up, when propane tanks become projectiles. A ball of flames lit up the night sky in rural Nova Scotia after a truck carrying hundreds of propane tanks caught fire. Fire officials say the flames reached as high as 20 meters as the exploding tanks launched into the nearby trees. But they say the remote location of the incident and that it happened at a late hour likely saved homes and lives. No one was injured, including the 2 men in the truck who got out in the nick of time. In Quebec, a campfire is believed to have sparked a massive fire in that province. The aggressive, out-of-control blaze is burning north of Quebec City. It has burned more than 72,000 hectares, and that's almost the size of Calgary. High winds and hot, dry conditions are fueling the flames. More than 200 firefighters from Manitoba and Ontario are being deployed to help. And in Arizona, crews are trying to get the upper hand on a huge fire near Tucson. The Bighorn blaze stretches more than 23,000 hectares, and it's only 16% contained. Evacuation orders are in effect for surrounding areas. Several other fires are burning across the state, including near Grand Canyon National Park. Still ahead, is it still too soon for long-term care homes to get back on track? As more long-term care homes are declared virus-free, they're taking in new residents to fill the hundreds of beds left vacant by those who have died from COVID-19. But filling those empty beds is opening up new concerns. Ross Lord explains.
After losing 17 residents to COVID-19, the Mark Haven Nursing Home in Markham, Ontario, has declared the outbreak over. Management says it's refilling empty beds. Some families oppose the move.
I think it's too soon, and I don't know what the plan is.
Cameron Robson's mother, Eileen, lives at Mark Haven. He fears incoming residents will bring infection with them or detract from the care of others.
So it's going to take a lot of time, and without increased staff, something is going to be sacrificed. And my fear is it's the residents' care. It's going to be my mom's care.
Mark Haven says new residents will be forced to isolate for 14 days, the same rules for residents being readmitted after hospital stays. Management says it's very confident in screening procedures, noting the Ontario government is providing extra funding to allow for increased staffing. But at a devastating time for many long-term care homes, balancing residents' numbers with staffing levels is a big challenge.
What's keeping us up at night right now is we have fewer staff in long-term care right now. We're not sure that those who left and are at home right now are going to be willing to come back. The stigma is so great. This is critical.
Labor unions say it's understandable staff are reluctant to rejoin the front line of the war against the virus.
We've had workers who have infected their spouses and their spouses died, and they have to live with that from working in these nursing homes. So some of them are saying this just is not worth it anymore.
Some efforts are paying off. Quebec, which leads Canada with more than 5,000 COVID-19 deaths, has been flooded with applications after offering a generous wage package to orderlies. Healthcare advocates say paying others more across the country would improve the odds of entering the next phase successfully. Ross Lord, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Hot yoga enthusiasts in Toronto now have a safe space to practice.
Let's take our hips back and straighten our right leg.
50 outdoor private domes have been put up. Temperatures inside can exceed 38 degrees. Of course, temperatures outside are feeling about as hot, with heat warnings still in effect across the region. The domes have received some backlash, many saying they should be used to house the homeless instead. Up next, the new mystery at Stonehenge that goes back more than 4,000 years. A huge announcement for all of our viewers tonight. Two of America's longest running and most successful news shows are coming to Global.
Is it true General Mattis said to you?
Starting this fall, you'll be able to watch the award-winning programs 60 Minutes and 48 Hours. On Saturdays, Global will be the new home for true crime when it airs 48 Hours. That will be followed by 60 Minutes on Sundays, which features in-depth interviews and investigative journalism. Stonehenge is one of the most studied prehistoric monuments in the world, and it's just yielded a new discovery. Archaeologists have found a huge ring of at least 20 ancient shafts near the famous stone structure. They form a circle around it that's more than 2 kilometers in diameter. The shafts were discovered using remote sensing technology. It's believed they were dug more than 4,500 years ago, before Stonehenge, and could mark a sacred site. Researchers say it's the largest prehistoric monument ever discovered in Britain and could shed new light on the origins of Stonehenge. And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with a delicious treat, or rather, a delicious street. Today, a Winnipeg committee voted to keep Slurpee Way for another 2 years. It's a tribute to the 7-Eleven beverage. After all, the frosty drink has sold more in Winnipeg than anywhere else, and the city has been dubbed the world's Slurpee capital. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen is back here tomorrow. Have a great night.